If you've ever made a real decision to change your life, if you've ever truly committed to becoming someone different, then you know something strange happens. There is this period that comes right after you decide, right after you assume your new reality, where everything feels fundamentally off. Your circumstances haven't changed yet. Your bank account still shows the same numbers. Your job is still the same. Your relationships are still the same. And yet, inside you, something has shifted so profoundly that the entire world feels like it's slightly out of sync with who you've decided to become. This is the strange thing. This is the threshold that most people never talk about because it's so uncomfortable that they abandon their decision before they ever reach the other side. They decide to change. They assume their new reality. They feel that initial spark of hope and possibility. And then, when reality doesn't immediately conform to their new assumption, they panic, they doubt. They slip back into their old identity like a worn-out jacket that finally feels familiar again. And they spend the rest of their lives wondering what would have happened if they'd just stayed the course. But what if that strange discomfort isn't a sign that something is wrong? What if it's actually a sign that something is profoundly right? What that feeling of being out of place in your own life is not an error in the process, but actually the most crucial part of the process? What if that period of disorientation is exactly what needs to happen before your external reality can reorganize itself to match your internal conviction? Most spiritual teaching focuses on the moment of decision. It talks about the power of belief, the magic of assumption, the importance of faith. But almost no one talks about what happens after you believe. Almost no one prepares you for the strange and disorienting period that comes next. Almost no one tells you that between the moment you decide to be wealthy and the moment wealth actually arrives, there is a territory that feels like psychological death. And you have to be willing to die there, to remain there, to surrender completely before you're reborn on the other side as the person you've assumed yourself to be. Think about what happens in the physical world when something is about to manifest. When you plant a seed, the seed doesn't immediately become a tree. First, the seed has to break apart. It has to dissolve. In that period underground, in the darkness, in the silence, something is being reorganized at a fundamental level. The seed is not the tree. The sprouting seedling is not the tree. The sapling is not the tree. But each of these stages is absolutely necessary. Each of these stages is essential. Without them, you never get to the tree. This is what happens in consciousness when you decide to become wealthy. Your old self, the person who assumed lack, has to begin to dissolve. Your old patterns of thinking, your old ways of moving through the world, your old beliefs about what's possible for you, these all have to crack open and break down. And this breaking down is terrifying. It's disorienting. It feels like you're losing yourself. In a way, you are. You're losing the self that you were. But the self that you're becoming hasn't fully emerged yet. So there's this strange in-between space where you're neither who you were nor who you're becoming. You're suspended in a kind of psychological death. This is where most people give up. This is where they panic and grasp for the familiar, even though the familiar has caused them so much pain. Because the familiar is at least known. The familiar is at least safe. But that in-between space, that strange territory between your old identity and your new identity, feels genuinely dangerous to your mind. Your survival instinct kicks in. Your fear takes over. And you abandon the journey. But what if you understood that this feeling is not a sign that you're doing something wrong? What if you understood that this disorientation, this strangeness, this sense of being out of place in your own life, is actually proof that something is working? What if the fact that you feel so uncomfortable is actually the most hopeful sign you could possibly receive? There's a particular kind of discomfort that happens during this period. It's not the discomfort of pain or suffering. It's not the discomfort of struggle or effort. It's the discomfort of contradiction. You're moving through your life as if something is true about you when every external circumstance seems to be screaming that it's a lie. You're assuming you're wealthy while your bank account shows scarcity. You're assuming you're confident while your circumstances seem to prove you're powerless. You're assuming you're worthy of love and respect while the world around you hasn't caught up to that assumption yet. This contradiction is maddening. It's the kind of thing that makes you feel slightly crazy. You feel like you're pretending, like you're living a lie, like you're delusional. And in a way, you are. You are delusional if you're defining delusion as being out of sync with external reality. But what most people don't understand is that external reality is not the truth. External reality is the past made manifest. External reality is the old assumption trying to persist. External reality is always one step behind consciousness. Consciousness is the first reality. Your assumption about who you are and what's possible for you is the first reality. The external world rearranges itself after that. The external world follows. It doesn't lead. But because most people look at external reality and treat it as if it's the ultimate truth, they never trust their internal reality enough to remain in the space of contradiction. They give up too soon. Here's what happens if you stay. Here's what happens if you continue to assume your new reality, even when there's no external proof yet. You begin to notice something subtle. You begin to notice that your nervous system starts to feel different. The panic that used to grip you when you thought about money begins to loosen. The anxiety about the future begins to quiet. The desperate grasping for external validation begins to relax. You're not fixing your circumstances, but you're changing how you relate to them internally. You're becoming someone different. This is the invisible work. This is what no one can see. This is the transformation that has to happen before the physical transformation can take place. Your nervous system has to update. Your body has to learn a new baseline. Your being has to reorganize around a new center. And this takes time. It takes repetition. It takes you continuing to assume your new reality, even when your mind is screaming that it's not real yet. But as you continue, something begins to happen. The contradiction starts to feel less like madness and more like faith. The gap between your assumption and your circumstance starts to feel less like a lie you're telling yourself, and more like a future that's already decided, already set in stone in the realm of consciousness, just waiting for time to catch up. You're not hoping anymore. You're not begging. You're not trying to convince yourself. You're simply living as someone who has already decided, someone for whom it's already true in the only place that ultimately matters. And then, when you're in this state, when you've crossed the threshold of the strange discomfort and come out the other side into this place of deep internal certainty, something begins to shift in the physical world. But here's what's strange: the shift doesn't feel the way you thought it would feel. You don't suddenly get a windfall. You don't suddenly get the miraculous phone call. What happens instead is far more subtle and far more powerful. Opportunities begin to appear. But they appear so naturally that at first you almost miss them. They don't feel miraculous. They feel obvious. They feel like the natural unfolding of your life. You meet someone in a conversation who mentions something that leads to something else, that eventually leads to money. But it doesn't feel like magic at the moment it's happening. It feels like coincidence. It feels like luck. It feels like a natural conversation that happened to have a certain outcome. Only later, when you look back, do you realize that this coincidence only appeared because you had shifted your consciousness, because you were in a different state of being, because you had become someone to whom this opportunity would naturally come. This is the strange thing that happens before wealth arrives. It's not a dramatic moment. It's a series of subtle shifts, natural unfoldings, and coincidences that all seem to lead toward your goal. And because they're so natural, because they don't feel miraculous or forced, many people still don't fully trust them. They're still waiting for the big sign, the dramatic proof, the moment where the universe loudly announces that they've succeeded. But that's not how it works. The proof doesn't come from outside. The proof comes from the feeling inside. When wealth is about to arrive, the first thing that arrives is the feeling of wealth. The first thing that arrives is the sense that you're already okay, already safe, already taken care of. Not as an affirmation, not as a positive thought, but as a genuine conviction, a genuine knowing. Something has shifted in you so fundamentally that you don't need external proof anymore. You don't need the money in your bank account to prove to you that you're wealthy. You've already felt it internally. You've already become it internally. And that internal wealth is so real, so solid, so undeniable that the external wealth becomes almost secondary. This is what most teachers never tell you. They talk about visualization. They talk about positive thinking. They talk about gratitude and affirmations and vision boards. But they don't talk about the fact that the real transformation happens in the absence of proof. They don't talk about the fact that the only way to truly become wealthy is to feel wealthy when there's no evidence that you are. They don't talk about the strange courage that it takes to maintain an assumption about yourself in direct contradiction to every external circumstance. There's a particular kind of loneliness in this space. When you're in that strange in-between territory, when you've assumed a new identity, but you're still living in the old circumstances, there's a profound isolation. You can't really talk to anyone about it, because how do you explain to someone that you've decided you're wealthy when you're still struggling financially? How do you explain that you've decided you're confident and worthy of respect when your circumstances haven't changed? How do you explain that you've made an internal decision that hasn't manifested externally yet? So you carry this alone. You move through your life looking like you did yesterday, but feeling completely different on the inside. Your friends see you as the same person. Your colleague treats you the same way. Your colleagues respond to you the same way. But you're different, fundamentally different. And this difference is invisible to everyone but you. And sometimes, in the middle of this loneliness, doubt creeps in. You begin to wonder if you're crazy. You begin to wonder if you're just fooling yourself. You begin to wonder if this is all a fantasy you've created to escape from reality. And this is exactly when you have to double down on your assumption. This is exactly when you have to feel the feeling more deeply. This is exactly when you have to become more convinced of your new identity, not less. Because doubt at this stage is not wisdom. Doubt is the old consciousness trying to drag you back. Doubt is the gravitational pull of your old identity trying to reassert itself. Doubt is fear wearing a mask of reason. The strange thing that happens before wealth arrives is that you become more convinced of your identity without any external evidence. You feel more certain, not less. You feel more at peace, not more anxious. You feel more at home in your new self, even though your external world hasn't changed. This is the threshold test. This is the point where you have to choose whether you're truly committed to this change or whether you're just playing at it. And if you pass this test, if you remain convinced of your identity, even in the face of contradiction, if you continue to assume your wealth, even when there's no proof, if you continue to feel yourself as the person you've decided to become, even when the world is still treating you as the person you used to be, then something extraordinary begins to happen. The contradiction starts to dissolve, slowly at first, then faster. The external reality begins to reorganize itself. The circumstances begin to shift. The coincidences begin to align. The opportunities begin to appear. But what's most important to understand is that this shift in external reality doesn't come because you finally earned it, or finally proved yourself worthy, or finally did enough work. It comes because you've already become it internally. It comes because you've already felt it deeply enough that you no longer need it to prove to you that it's true. Your external wealth is simply the external manifestation of your internal wealth. Your external circumstances are simply a mirror reflecting your internal state. This is why so many people receive their manifestations and then lose them. They receive the money or the opportunity or the relationship, and then they slip back into their old consciousness. They get the external proof, and then they no longer feel the need to maintain the internal state that brought it to them. So their consciousness drops back down, their assumption returns to lack, and their circumstances naturally reorganize themselves to match this new drop in consciousness. They lose what they gained because they didn't understand that the external is always secondary to the internal. The strange thing that happens before wealth arrives is that you become so convinced of your internal wealth that you no longer desperately need the external proof. You reach a point where you're at peace regardless of whether it arrives or not. You've already won the inner game. You've already become the person. You've already felt the feeling. And because of this inner certainty, because of this inner completion, the external wealth naturally follows. It has to. The law demands it. There's a surrender that has to happen in this space between your decision and your manifestation. Not a surrender that means giving up, but a surrender that means releasing your grip, releasing your desperate need for the external world to prove to you that you're right, releasing your attachment to a specific timeline or a specific way that it has to happen, releasing your need to control how your manifestation arrives. You've made your decision. You've assumed your identity. You've felt the feeling. Now you have to trust that the universe will meet you exactly where you've decided to be. This trust is not blind. This trust is not foolish. This trust is based on an understanding of how consciousness works, how reality responds to your assumptions, how the universe is constantly reorganizing itself to match your internal state. Your job is not to figure out how it will happen. Your job is not to convince the universe or force it or prove that you're deserving. Your job is simply to be in the state of already having it, to be in the feeling of already being it, to continue to carry the assumption even when there's no external proof. And as you do this, as you remain in this state of peaceful conviction, the strange discomfort begins to transmute. What once felt like madness begins to feel like clarity. What once felt like contradiction begins to feel like faith. What once felt like you were lying to yourself begins to feel like you're finally telling yourself the truth. The truth that you are not your circumstances. The truth that you are not your past. The truth that you are what you decide you are. The truth that your consciousness is more powerful than your circumstances. In this space, even without the external proof, you begin to feel genuinely free. You begin to feel genuinely wealthy. You begin to feel genuinely worthy of good things. Not because anything external has changed, but because something fundamental inside you has changed. You've stopped looking for validation from the world. You've stopped looking for proof from your circumstances. You've become your own source of truth. You've become convinced from within. And this is the real wealth. This is the real transformation. Everything else that follows is just the universe catching up to where you already are internally. This is the strange thing. This is the secret that so few people understand. Before wealth arrives externally, it arrives internally. Before opportunity manifests, it's already living inside you as a conviction. Before the money flows into your bank account, it flows into your consciousness as a feeling of abundance. Before the world rearranges itself to meet you, you've already rearranged yourself internally to meet your own vision of who you are. There are people going through this right now. People who made a decision, who assumed their new reality, who felt that strange discomfort of living in the gap between their decision and their manifestation. Some of them will panic and go back. They'll slip back into their old consciousness because the contradiction became too much. They'll choose the familiar pain over the unfamiliar hope, and their lives will remain exactly as they were. But some of them will stay the course. Some of them will continue to assume their new identity even when it feels mad. Some of them will continue to feel the feeling even when there's no proof. And for those people, extraordinary things will begin to happen. Not eventually, not someday, but right now. The process is already unfolding. What makes the difference? What separates the people who reach the other side from the people who give up in the middle? It's not intelligence. It's not luck. It's not who they know or where they started. It's simply the decision to remain committed to an assumption, even in the face of contradiction. It's the decision to trust consciousness more than circumstances. It's the decision to be someone, not because the world has validated it, but because you've decided it from within. And the beautiful thing is that this is available to you right now. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to wait for the external world to change first. You can make this decision now. You can assume your new identity now. You can feel the feeling now. And if you can stay with that feeling, if you can remain in that assumption, even when the external world hasn't caught up yet, if you can maintain that conviction through the strange discomfort of the in-between, then you will arrive. You will cross through. You will come out the other side as the person you've decided to be. And the world will meet you there. The strange thing that happens before wealth arrives is that you stop trying to arrive. You stop pushing. You stop forcing. You stop grasping. You simply become. You simply assume, you simply feel. And in that stopping, in that surrender, in that decision to be instead of to have, everything changes. The universe recognizes your conviction and reorganizes itself to match it. Opportunities appear, money flows, doors open, people show up, circumstances align, and it all feels so natural, so inevitable, so perfect that you almost forget that just weeks or months ago you were living in complete contradiction to this reality. This is where most people never arrive because they can't handle the strangeness of it. But you can. You can handle the contradiction. You can handle the loneliness. You can handle the feeling of being crazy. You can handle the disorientation of not yet having the external proof. Because now you know what's happening. Now you understand that this is not a sign that something is wrong. This is a sign that something is profoundly right. This is the process. This is the strange thing that precedes every great transformation. So, tonight, if you're in that space, if you're in that strange between territory where you've made a decision, but the world hasn't caught up yet, know that you're in exactly the right place. And know that the discomfort you feel is proof that something is working. Know that the contradiction you're experiencing is proof that you're in the process of becoming. Know that the strange feeling of living as someone you're not yet being externally is the exact prerequisite for you to become that person externally. You're not crazy. You're not delusional. You're not fooling yourself. You're simply awake. You're simply aware. You're simply living as the person you've decided to be before the world has caught up to that decision. And if you can remain there, if you can stay with that feeling, if you can continue to assume that identity even when there's no proof, then you will arrive. Not eventually, not someday, but right now. The moment you decided, you arrived. The moment you assumed, you became. The moment you felt the feeling, it was true. All that remains is for the external world to reorganize itself to match what's already true within you. And it will. The strange thing before wealth arrives is that you've already arrived internally. The journey is already complete. All that remains is to live from that completion, to move from that place of already having, already being, already knowing. And as you do, as you carry that internal certainty into every moment of every day, the world has no choice but to meet you there. The law demands it, consciousness demands it, reality demands it. So assume your wealth, assume your identity, assume your worthiness. Feel the feeling of already having what you desire. And then, in the face of any contradiction, in the face of any doubt, in the face of any circumstance that seems to prove you wrong, simply deepen your assumption. Simply feel the feeling more deeply. Simply become more convinced. Because the strange thing that happens before wealth arrives is that you become absolutely certain before there's any proof. And once you reach that certainty, once you feel that conviction in every cell of your being, the external manifestation becomes inevitable. It becomes not a question of if, but simply a matter of when and how. And that, finally, is when you can rest.